Greetings from Spirit of Joy Lutheran Church in Clarkdale, Arizona. It's Naomi Barkanik again with another session of wishful thinking. You know, we're on the P's. We're moving right along. We might be done by Christmas. Let's begin. Our first word is parents. Honor your father and mother, says the fifth commandment. That's in Exodus 20, verse 12. Honor them for having taken care of you before you were old enough to take care of yourself. Honor them for the sacrifices they made on your behalf, including the ones you would have kept them from making if you'd had the chance. Honor them for having loved you. But how do you honor your parents when, well-intentioned as they may have been, they made some terrible mistakes with you that have shadowed your life ever since? How do you honor them when, far from loving you or taking care of you, they literally or otherwise abandoned you? How do you honor them when physically or sexually or emotionally they have abused you? The answer seems to be that you are to honor them even so. And please, if anyone is watching that did not have very good parents, please don't shut me off. Please continue to listen. I'll read this line one more time and then we'll continue. The answer seems, no matter how your parents treated you, you are to honor them even so. Honor them for the pain that made them what they were and kept them from being what they might otherwise have become. Honor them because there were times when, even at their worst, they were doing the best they knew how to do. Honor them for the roles they were appointed to play: father, mother. Because even when they played them terribly, or didn't play them at all, the roles themselves are holy. Honor your parents, because however unthinkingly or irresponsibly they gave you your life. We all know St. Paul, the Apostle Paul, the missionary Paul, the missionary that went in many places in the first and second centuries, third centuries, to found new churches. He's written many letters to churches that are in our New Testament. He wrote to the Corinthians in Corinth, to the Galatians in Galatia, to the Thessalonikites in Thessalonica, to the Ephesians in Ephesus, and so on. He was quite a guy. Listen to what Buechner says about Paul. Paul was madder and bluer, more proud and more humble, more strong and more weak than almost anybody else you're apt to think of. He lived a weird dichotomy of a life. And the splash he made when he fell for Christ can still be heard when you read some of his letters. It is little wonder that from the start he was a genius at making enemies. Because you see, Paul was not born Paul. He was born Saul into a well-to-do family in Jerusalem. He was raised as a proud Jewish young man, sat on many boards, not only in the religious sector, but also in the national sector. Everything was going along fine. His career was off to a good start. But then all of a sudden, this Jesus came onto the scene and was luring many Jews to think a little wider than the Jewish religion did. And in time, as we all know, this Jesus was winning many of the Jewish people to become Christians. Jesus rocked the boat in Judaism. And we know what happened to Jesus. He was nailed to a cross. It was okay with Saul because he wasn't on Christ's side at that time. For many years, he, along with many others, persecuted the Christians. Many times he rode with soldiers and would sit and watch their garments as the soldiers would persecute the Christians. They just didn't fit in his radar screen. But one day, as he was on a horse riding to another encounter to persecute Christians, he had an encounter with Christ himself, an encounter that threw him off of his horse, and he became blind. And that was when, and through many of a struggle of his blindness, he became Paul. God renamed him, took away his name Saul, and made him Paul, because now Paul was a convert of Jesus. Paul was a convert. He fit in with all the other Christians whom he had once persecuted. And what Paul writes in his letters, he said, as his own letters indicate, his contemporaries, his fellow Christians, accused him of being insincere, crooked, physically repulsive, unclean, bumbling, and off his rocker. He was too much, too crazy for Christ. Since then, the charges against him have tended to narrow down some. Simply that he took the beautiful gospel of Jesus and loused it up with obscure, divisive, and unnecessary theological subtleties. Anybody who thinks the gospel of Jesus Christ is simple, however, should go back and take a look at the gospel. Love your neighbor. Be ye perfect. Did you know that the Father and I are one? Follow me. The only thing that's simple about the gospel is the language. Paul needed to know more. What do you mean, love your neighbor? How do I do that? What do you mean, be ye perfect? What do you mean, follow you? These are the questions Paul digs into with all the gentleness and tact of a pneumatic drill. Jesus exploded on the scene like a bomb and blew the world in general and the world of Judaism and Saul in particular sky high. And it was left to the new convert Paul to try to sort out the pieces. And he tried so hard. He wrote the church at Corinth what he got for his pains. 5 times I have received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I have been beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I have been shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been adrift at sea. In danger from rivers, robbers, my own people. In toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, in cold and exposure. These were written to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. He suffered for Christ because Christ became his whole life. And he didn't stop letting other people know. One hears the whines and boasts of him, and one wishes he hadn't been the one who had to say it, but he says it and he means it. And then he says, I will not boast except of my weakness. And he means that too. Because the God who could work through me, through the likes of me, who persecuted his people, is a God I must follow forever. And so Paul continues with cauliflower ears and a split lip and whatever he meant by the thorn in the flesh that God gave to keep him from being too elated. Paul went his way and wrote his marvelous Christ letters to the churches that he founded. Jesus lit the fire, changed Saul into Paul, and used Paul to forge for Jesus a church in Jesus' name. Peace. Peace has come to mean the time when there aren't any wars, or even when there weren't any major wars. Beggars can't be choosers. Most of us would settle for that. But in Hebrew, the word peace is shalom, which means fullness, means having everything you need to be whole and happy yourself. So if when someone says to you, shalom, whether he says or she says it in a greeting or in a goodbye, it's something for your well-being. Peace. Shalom. One of the titles by which Jesus is known as Prince of Peace, and he used the word himself in what seem at first glance to be 2 radically contradictory utterances. On one occasion he said to the disciples, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace on earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword." That's in Matthew 10, verse 34. But later on, the last time, he and his disciples ate together, he said to them, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you." John 14, verse 27. The contradiction is resolved when we realize that for Jesus, peace seems to have meant not the absence of struggle, but the presence of love. Let's do one more. Physician. We go to him or her with whatever ails us. We take off what the nurse asks us to and sit there until he or she appears. Who knows what the examination will reveal, but we try to prepare ourselves for the worst. It is not just our bodies that we are putting on the line, but maybe even our chance for survival. We are no longer in control of our future, but like children can only wait for a grown-up to determine it. Stripped of our dignity and self-confidence, no less than of most of our clothes, stripped of our dignity and self-confidence no less than most of our clothes, we perhaps don't feel quite so vulnerable anywhere else on earth. Sitting there with that robe that ties in the back, but still stays kind of open. When the physician finally steps through the door and starts checking us over, we hang not just on every word he or she speaks, but on the look in his or her eyes and the tone of his or her voice for some clue to what he or she makes of our condition. When he or she finally tells us, we listen as though our lives depended on it, which quite possibly they do. If he or she knows his or her business in just the touch of his or her hands, we feel healing, no matter the news. Several times in the gospel, Jesus indirectly refers to himself as a physician. Read Matthew 9:12 or Luke 4:23. It is a richly touching and suggestive image. Imagine sitting on that table with only that flimsy robe tied in the back, waiting for the physician to enter, and the door opens, and in comes Jesus. Meditate that as you go to sleep. Well, that's it for now. Stay well, and I wish all of you shalom.